On the morning of April 21st, 2025, the city of Rome found itself shrouded in a heavy cloud of grief and confusion following the news of Pope Francis's passing. St. Peter's Square, typically teeming with life and devotion, now mirrored the collective sorrow of millions of followers around the globe. The usual sounds of laughter and prayer were replaced by whispers of disbelief. The air felt thick, as if the city itself was mourning. News crews from around the world quickly mobilized to cover this unfolding tragedy, their cameras capturing the tear-streaked faces of the faithful as they gathered in disbelief. As the official confirmation from the Vatican came through, it was clear that the loss of this spiritual leader was more than just an announcement. It was akin to the ripping open of a wound already exposed in a world fragile from intolerance and division. Many who sought solace crowded into the chapels and churches, their prayers rising up in a chorus of longing and reflection. The absence of the traditional Easter greeting hung heavily in the air, echoing like a silent lament within the hearts of those who had come to rely on the Pope's optimistic messages. In the midst of the somber atmosphere, the Vatican released a statement inviting the world to enter a year of spiritual silence, urging everyone to reflect on the true essence of peace and the brotherly love that Pope Francis had always championed. This call to quiet introspection felt like a double-edged sword. While it encouraged individuals to look inward and unite in their search for meaning, it simultaneously bore the weight of profound expectations. The challenge was significant. Could the world truly pause long enough to meet its own vulnerability and assess its path forward? While the announcement stirred contemplation, a sense of mystery lingered around a secret letter that Pope Francis had reportedly written before his death. Details regarding its contents remained elusive, stirring a quiet yet powerful curiosity among the faithful. Speculation ran rampant about what insights these hidden words might contain. Some whispered that it could hold the wisdom necessary to guide humanity through its darkest hours, while others feared it could contain truths too difficult to bear. With hope and trepidation coexisting, many found themselves yearning to know what the Pope had intended to communicate in his final days. Amidst the chaos, life continued, but it felt different. Streets normally bustling with tourists were now lined with flowers and candles, remnants of a public vigil that had spontaneously erupted. People gathered not just to mourn, but to celebrate the life of a man who had devoted himself to the dignity of every human being. Families came together, recounting stories of how his messages had touched their lives and inspired them to be better. For some, he had been more than a pope. He had embodied a sense of possibility in an increasingly cynical world. As days passed, debates emerged surrounding the implications of the Pope's death. Catholic leaders in various countries began to express differing views on the future direction of the Church. Would they align with the vision of inclusivity that he had pushed for, or would they retreat into the fortress of traditionalism? The tension highlighted a broader conflict within society, a struggle between progress and the status quo echoing in many faith communities across the globe. In the heart of it all, individuals were awakened to a sense of solidarity beyond the walls of the Church. Inspired by Pope Francis's call for unity, grassroots movements began to sprout in various cities, emphasizing community engagement and mutual support. They sought to transform grief into action, encouraging discussions about peace that extended beyond faith, weaving together diverse perspectives to promote understanding. As the world entered this year of silence, it became clear that the legacy of Pope Francis would continue to spark dialogue long after his voice had ceased. Imagine the myriad conversations and reflections that would unfold as people sought to find their place within this new chapter. Each individual was a thread in a larger tapestry, their contributions coloring the path forward. In the face of loss, there was also an overwhelming sense of possibility. Perhaps within the silence, people could rediscover their shared humanity and cultivate the seeds of hope that Pope Francis had left behind. Thus, as the sun set over Rome, painting the sky with a melody of colors, individuals held onto their prayers, their fears, and their hopes. In this collective moment of vulnerability, the world was called to pause, reflect, and ultimately embrace the invitation to life anew. Pope Francis's journey may have ended, but his message would inspire. An awakening that urged humanity toward a future, one rooted in love, compassion, and an enduring quest for peace. Irina Castellucci, a retired theology professor known throughout Assisi, felt the heavy weight of grief settle in her chest as news of Pope Francis's death spread across the world. At 68 years old, she had spent decades teaching and sharing the ideals of love, compassion, and community that he embodied. However, as she sat in her modest home, her thoughts spiraled into reflection. The past few years, especially through the challenges of the pandemic, had turned her spiritual beliefs inward. What had once been vibrant practices of faith became more theoretical, distant memories rather than lived experiences. In a world that seemed to stray from Francis's teachings, Irene often questioned the authenticity of her faith and her role in it. As she walked through the cobblestone streets of Assisi, memories surfaced like leaves caught in a gentle breeze. Every corner of the city echoed with the history she loved, yet it felt hollow in comparison to the teachings she held dear. The majestic basilicas and their lofty spires now appeared as solemn reminders of a deeper void. While she had always believed in the power of love and service now, she felt like an observer of her own beliefs, rather than an active participant. The news of the Pope's secret letter had reached her, igniting a flicker of something dormant within her. Curiosity mingled with an unsettling feeling, pushing her to reconsider her connection to faith and, more importantly, her family. It dawned on her that this was no ordinary call. It was a spiritual awakening, one that urged her to rediscover her roots and confront the unresolved pain in her life. Her thoughts drifted toward Maria Teresa, her sister. They hadn't spoken in 27 years. The memories of their childhood seeped in, layered with both happiness and unresolved tension. Irene could still hear echoes of laughter during family gatherings, but also recall heated arguments that had driven a wedge between them. The pain of separation weighed heavily on her heart, and ironically, the teachings she had instilled in her students urged her to seek forgiveness and understanding. Withdrawal. Each step, the pulse of Assisi throbbed around her as she contemplated reaching out to her sister. It felt daunting. Surely Maria Teresa held onto resentments just as tightly as Irene had clung to her own. But the urgency of the moment pulled at her. What would it take to reconcile? How could she face the hurt she had buried for so long? The call for peace echoed louder than her fears. Irene was determined to confront not only her sister but also herself, the beliefs she had internalized and the void left by her estrangement. That night, she began to draft a letter, carefully choosing her words, to convey a sense of humility and openness. "Dear Maria Teresa," it began, and she paused. The phrase felt like a doorway she had hesitated to open for far too long. A flurry of memories rushed through her, filling her with a mix of hope and anxiety. Taking a deep breath, she recalled the laughter they once shared as children and the warmth of being sisters. She wrote about the challenges she had faced in recent years, the longing for connection she felt, and her desire to bridge the chasm that had grown between them. As the ink dried, Irene felt a wave of relief wash over her. In that moment, she realized that reaching out to Maria Teresa was just as much about her own healing as it was about mending their relationship. It was a step toward reclaiming her faith in true love and familial bonds, challenging the loneliness that had encircled her for far too long. She understood that the journey ahead wasn't merely about reconciling past grievances, but also about rediscovering the threads of love that once wove their lives together. The next day, fueled by determination, Irene decided she would not merely send the letter. Instead, she would visit her sister in person. This decision transformed her anticipation into a tangible goal. As she prepared for the journey, thoughts of her sister flooded her mind. The small moments they had shared, the family dinners, the shared secrets, the Christmases filled with joy, felt like whispers from a distant past, urging her to take this crucial step. With the rolling hills of Assisi as her backdrop, Irene set out on a path that would lead her toward reconciliation. She felt a mix of trepidation and a glimmer of hope. With each step, she was not only moving closer to Maria Teresa, but also closer to herself, to the person she wanted to be, a sister, a believer, and a seeker of peace. As she walked, the sun began to break through the clouds, and for the first time in a long while, Irene felt that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a new chapter. For behind every step was the promise of healing and the first taste of forgiveness, propelling her forward into the unknown. As Irene prepared for her journey to reconcile with her sister, she felt an urge to seek the blessing of an old friend and mentor. Father Antonio, a Jesuit priest, had known Pope Francis personally and was a significant figure in her life ever since she had first entered the world of theology. His wisdom had always guided her, and she hoped he would provide the encouragement she needed to take this bold step toward healing. When she arrived at the small chapel where Father Antonio now held his services, she was greeted by the familiar scent of incense and the soft flicker of candlelight. The chapel, tucked away in a quiet corner of Assisi, was a refuge for those seeking solace and guidance. As she approached Father Antonio, she noticed his lined face, full of kindness and understanding. They embraced warmly, and Irene felt a rush of comfort wash over her. "Father, I need your advice," she began, the urgency in her voice evident. She explained her decision to reach out to Maria Teresa, sharing the fears and memories that tangled with her desire for reconciliation. Father Antonio listened intently, nodding as she spoke, and once she finished, he took a moment before responding. "I remember the Pope speaking of reconciliation often," he said thoughtfully. "He believed that harboring resentment only robs us of our inner peace. Forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves, Irene. It frees us to love more fully." His words hung in the air, resonating with the weight of their history. Irene thought of the many bitter memories she had stored away. Over the years, a particular incident from their childhood suddenly emerged in her mind, tugging at her heart. She recalled the time they were supposed to build a treehouse together, only for the project to crumble into a disaster of arguments and blame. The laughter they could have shared was replaced by harsh words, and the rift between them began. That day had been pivotal, marking the beginning of their estrangement. "Do I need to forget the past to move forward?" Irene asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Not forget, but rather understand it," Father Antonio replied gently. "Our memories shape us, but they don't have to define us. You can honor that experience while choosing to write a new story, a story of healing and love." Feeling inspired, Irene left the chapel with a renewed sense of determination. She headed toward the sanctuary of St. Francis, a place filled with history and spirituality. As she walked, the cobblestones beneath her feet whispered tales of compassion and understanding that resonated within her. The sanctuary loomed ahead, its architecture a testament to faith and connectedness. Once inside, she took a moment to absorb the atmosphere. The walls seemed to echo with centuries of teachings that celebrated compassion and forgiveness. She found a quiet corner and sat down, allowing herself to enter a state of reflection. In the silence, she considered all that she had endured and felt the pangs of regret, but also a sense of deep yearning for change. Irene understood that the journey toward reconciliation required confronting her fears and letting go of the burdens she had carried for far too long. The warmth of Father Antonio's wisdom surrounded her like a comforting embrace, urging her to tap into the inner strength she had long forgotten. The sanctuary, rich with the spirit of St. Francis, became her catalyst for transformation. It ignited a fire within her to be not just a seeker of peace, but an active agent of it in her life. As thoughts of her sister danced in her mind, she envisioned Maria Teresa smiling, their laughter echoing through their childhood once again. Fueled by this vision, she began to imagine the conversations they would have, the stories they would share, and the paths they could walk together. It wasn't just about mending what was broken, it was about building something new together. In Niao, those sacred moments, Irene made a silent promise to herself and to the universe. She would strive to embody the teachings of kindness and forgiveness that had been swept aside in her life for so long. Perhaps her relationship with Maria Teresa could lead to a ripple effect, inspiring others to seek their own paths toward reconciliation. The sanctuary had served its purpose, empowering her to embrace both her past and the future with renewed strength and purpose. Leaving the sanctuary, each step forward felt lighter. The aching memories transformed from burdens into fuel, pushing her toward a beautiful possibility, an opportunity to connect not only with her sister, but with the deeper fabric of life itself. As she stepped back into the vibrant streets of Assisi, Irene's heart brimmed with hope, ready to embark on the journey ahead. Irene made the bold decision to travel to Morocco, her heart racing with the possibilities that lay ahead. She believed that connecting with Fatima El-Badri, a young scholar of Islam who had dedicated herself to interfaith dialogue, could illuminate the application of Pope Francis's message in a world that often seemed divided by fear and misunderstanding. As she prepared for her journey, the weight of her years and her struggles lingered in the back of her mind, but anticipation mixed with hope kept her moving forward. Arriving in Marrakesh was a sensory feast that ignited something in her that had felt dormant for far too long. The vibrant colors of the souks, the tantalizing scents of spices wafting through the air, and the lively sounds of merchants calling out to potential buyers created an atmosphere that made her feel alive again. The city pulsed with an energy that seemed to breathe new life into her spirit, and she quickly found herself swept away by the warmth of the local culture. However, finding Fatima proved to be more challenging than she had anticipated. With limited knowledge of the city and its labyrinthine streets, she wandered through the winding alleys, her excitement gradually giving way to frustration. After several misdirections and a few minor mishaps, Irene found herself sitting on a low bench outside a bustling cafe, feeling a bit defeated. As she waited, she admired the way life unfolded around her. Children played, couples strolled hand in hand, and the aroma of fresh mint tea filled the air. Just as she was beginning to lose hope, she caught sight of a woman approaching, her dark hair cascading around her shoulders, exuding confidence and warmth. Fatima had arrived. The moment their eyes met, Irene felt a spark of recognition, as if they were two disparate threads finding their way into a tapestry of shared purpose. They exchanged greetings, and before long, they were seated at a modest table with the sounds of Marrakesh swirling around them. The initial moments were tinged with tension. Both women felt the weight of their cultural backgrounds and the expectations that came with them. Irene, raised in a Christian tradition, and Fatima, deeply rooted in her Islamic faith, approached each other with caution. Yet, as they began to talk, the air shifted, filled with the flickering sparks of understanding. Fatima spoke passionately about her work in promoting peace and coexistence. "You know," she said, leaning in closer, "Pope Francis's message resonates deeply, in our community, especially in these times. His calls for compassion remind us that we are all part of the same human family." Irina listened intently, her heart opening as Fatima shared stories of resistance against prejudice, illustrating the bonds that formed between Muslims and Christians. The conversation flowed effortlessly as they exchanged ideas and experiences. Irene felt her own barriers beginning to melt away. The differences that had once seemed vast began to dissolve as she recognized a shared commitment to love and mutual respect. Memories of her upbringing surfaced, interspersed with moments of revelation, and she could no longer deny the common ground they shared. For the first time in years, Irene felt a profound sense of connection, not just with Fatima, but with humanity at large. This encounter was a turning point, a first step on a path she had longed to walk for decades. It felt as if each story, each shared laugh, dismantled the walls she had carefully constructed around herself. As they sipped their mint tea, the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting a golden hue over the cafe. Irene knew this moment was crucial. It established a new standard for how she would interact with others moving forward. Rooted in intention, her journey was no longer about isolation, but about the power of dialogue and shared experience. When their conversation began to wind down, Irene thanked Fatima for her warmth and insight. As they exchanged contact information, she felt a sense of hope flood through her veins. The world might seem fractured, but here was a bridge being built in real time, one conversation at a time. Walking back through the streets of Marrakesh, Irene's pace quickened. She felt lighter, as if the very act of reaching out had opened up a world filled with endless possibilities. The vibrant life of the city mirrored the joy blooming within her, urging her onward to further connections, deeper understanding, and the chance to nurture a more compassionate world. This was just the beginning, and her newly found courage filled her with excitement for all that lay ahead on her journey. Back in Assisi, Irene felt the tension in her chest tighten as she prepared to confront her sister, Maria Teresa, after years of silence. The thought of their long-awaited reunion sent her heart racing, a mixture of anxiety and hope swirling within her. They were meeting at the family sanctuary, a place that was supposed to embody peace and healing. Yet, now it was filled with echoes of old disputes and unresolved pain. The serene environment, once a safe haven, bore witness to their separation, and Irene was acutely aware of that heaviness as she walked through the doors. As the familiar stone walls closed around her, emotions bubbled to the surface. The air felt thick, charged with unspoken words that hung between them, waiting for the right moment to burst forth. Irene stepped inside and found Maria Teresa standing near the altar, a figure etched with years of hurt. Their eyes met, and an awkward silence settled in, amplifying the tension around them. Just outside, dark clouds gathered, and the first rumbles of thunder echoed across the sky, mirroring the tempest brewing between the sisters. "Irene," Maria Teresa finally broke the silence, her voice laced with a mix of anger and concern. "You show up after all these years, and I don't even know who you are anymore." There was a sharpness in her tone that cut through the air like a blade, that felt like a kick to Irene's gut. She had hoped for understanding, but the floodgates of frustration had already begun to open. "I know it's been a long time," Irene replied, forcing herself to keep her voice steady despite the surge of emotion. "I've done a lot of thinking, and I've learned so much since we last spoke. I came here to find a bridge between us, to share what I've discovered." She took a step closer, hopeful that vulnerability might soften her sister's heart. "Discoveries?" Maria Teresa scoffed. "Is that what you call abandoning your faith and turning your back on everything we believed in? You think you can just walk back into my life and pretend like we can pick up where we left off? You have no idea how much your choices have hurt me and the family." Irene felt the sting of those words, the accusation wrapping around her like a suffocating shroud. "I didn't abandon my faith, Maria. I've struggled, but I've also been searching for deeper connections, for the meaning behind our beliefs. I came to understand that faith is about more than just tradition." Her voice shook with emotion, but she stood firm, determined not to back down. As they exchanged words, the storm outside intensified, rain pounding against the stained glass. Windows, their vibrant colors swirling into a blur through the tempest. Both sisters were caught in a turbulent exchange, its emotional intensity reflecting the weather crashing down around them. The conversation spiraled into deep-seated grievances, painful memories that resurfaced like ghosts refusing to be laid to rest. Each harsh word exchanged seemed to chip away at the facade of resolve that Irene had built over the years. Would they ever move beyond this hurt? Finally, after what felt like an eternity of verbal push and pull, a sudden silence enveloped the room. The tension began to crack, revealing a path forward. In that moment, a flicker of understanding crossed Maria Teresa's face, softening her features. Irene seized the opportunity, her voice gentler now. What if what separates us doesn't have to define us? We are still sisters, after everything, and we can still choose love. Just then, the storm outside began to abate. The rain softened, and a glimpse of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the sanctuary and casting a warm glow between them. It was as though the universe had chosen that moment to intervene, offering them a reminder that even after the fiercest storms, there is always the possibility of calm. Tentatively, they stepped closer, the electric tension giving way to an undeniable vulnerability. Irene asked for forgiveness for her absence, and gradually, Maria Teresa began to understand the weight Irene had carried for all those years. Tears welled in her eyes, and the once hostile facade began to melt. As they reached out, the embrace they formed was tentative, yet filled with a fragile strength. It was not a resolution to all their conflicts, rather a hopeful acknowledgement that they were willing to take the first step toward healing. They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, as the echoes of the past slowly dissolved, leaving behind the promise of a new beginning. In that moment, they understood that the years spent apart didn't have to dictate the future they could build together. The embrace was an unspoken agreement to journey forward, to continue the dialogue, and to explore the depths of their sisterhood once more. It piqued the potential for reconciliation, where love and understanding could flourish, even amidst the remnants of past hurts. The storm had indeed passed, marking the dawning of a new path filled with hope, empathy, and a rekindled bond that neither of them could have foreseen. Irene felt a flicker of excitement in her chest as she arrived at the modest church in a quaint village near Assisi. As she stepped inside, the familiar scent of polished wood mingled with the sharp scent of incense that danced through the air. It was there that she hoped to meet Father Miguel Alvarez, a seasoned priest who had connections to something much larger than herself. Rumors had whispered about the letters exchanged between Pope Francis and indigenous leaders from the Amazon, letters that could hold profound wisdom about compassion, dignity, and justice. This encounter promised not only answers, but also an expansion of her understanding of connection. As she waited, the soft sound of footsteps drew her attention to Father Miguel, who approached with a warm smile and an inviting presence. He had a friendly face, etched with lines of experience and kindness. "Irene, it's a pleasure to finally meet you," he said, reaching out to shake her hand. "Thank you for seeing me, Father," she replied, trying to keep the tremor of anticipation out of her voice. "I've heard about the letters exchanged between the Pope and the indigenous leaders. I believe understanding his message can help me in my journey." Father Miguel nodded, understanding the depth of her desire. "You're right. Those letters are significant. They convey not just words but stories and connections that resonate deeply with the struggles of indigenous communities. Let me share what I can." He gestured for her to follow him to a small study, lined with books and photos of various communities he had served over the years. Once inside, Father Miguel pulled out a worn folder filled with pages that had borne witness to powerful dialogue. As he explained the letters, Irene was captivated by the layers of meaning behind each sentence. "These letters discuss the respect for the earth and the dignity of its people," he began, his voice steady but passionate. Pope Francis understood that the fight for their rights is connected to the fight for our environment, our shared home. Irene listened intently as Father Miguel recounted stories from the Amazon. He spoke of the deforestation and the encroachment of corporate interests hurting communities that had existed for centuries in harmony with nature. The letters have ignited both hope and frustration, he continued. They've become a source of strength and determination for these communities. You see, Francisco didn't just offer words. He extended a profound hand of solidarity. With each story, Irene's heart swelled with emotion. The struggles faced by these indigenous communities were not just their own. They connected to something broader, a shared humanity that called for action and compassion. "How can I help?" she asked, her voice firm with resolve. She felt a desire to be part of something greater, to take a stand for those whose voices often went unheard. Father Miguel smiled knowingly. It starts with understanding and sharing their narratives. You might not go to the Amazon, but you can advocate for them in your community, spreading awareness and fostering connections between diverse spiritual traditions that recognize our collective responsibility. As he spoke, Irene felt the pieces of her own journey falling into place. The letters were not just historical records, but living documents that demanded engagement and empathy from all people, regardless of their background or faith. It was a compelling call to arms, a reminder that the mission of Pope Francis endured beyond his earthly presence and required a response from each individual. This encounter became a turning point for Irene. She realized that her search for peace and connection had broad implications, integrating her personal struggles into the larger tapestry of humanity. No longer did she see herself as merely a seeker. She was now part of a movement that transcended borders and beliefs. Leaving Father Miguel's study, her heart was ablaze with new purpose. The letters had opened a portal, revealing how interconnected their lives truly were. She carried not only hope, but also an obligation, a desire to amplify these voices and advocate for those who suffered from injustice. As she walked back through the village, the sunlight filtering through the trees above began to warm her, and she felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from her shoulders. The compassionate message of Pope Francis was not just something she was studying. It was a calling that she understood deeply now. It was about bridging gaps, fostering understanding, and embracing the diversity of the human experience. That day, Irene made a silent vow to carry the stories of the indigenous people within her, to weave their struggles and triumphs into her own. And as she did, she felt the spark of something profound stirring within her. This was just the beginning, a journey filled with purpose that would guide her to create connections, foster dialogue, and ultimately promote peace in a world so desperately in need of it. After months of searching and forging unexpected connections, Irene found herself drawn to a silent retreat in Japan. The memory of her mentors. Encouraging words lingered in her mind, urging her to seek stillness and solitude. As she arrived at the retreat center, nestled in the rolling hills near Kyoto, she immediately felt a wave of serenity wash over her. The air was crisp and cherry, blossoms floated gently in the breeze, creating a scene that felt almost otherworldly. Standing at the entrance, Irene could see a modest wooden structure that blended beautifully with nature. People moved about quietly, respectful of the rules that governed this serene environment. The concept of silence had always intrigued her, but now it felt imperative. It was time to step back from the clamor of her chaotic life and dive deep into the waters of self-reflection. The first day was challenging. Irene struggled with the overwhelming silence and her own racing thoughts. During meditation sessions, she found it difficult to quiet her mind, which was still busy replaying the events of the past months, the encounters she had experienced, her sister's hurt, her conversations with Father Miguel, swirled in her head like leaves caught in a whirlwind. But by the end of the day, as she lay in her minimalist room, the stillness began to seep, and she realized this retreat might be the turning point she needed. On the second morning, The sun peeked through the sliding doors as she quietly joined the other participants for meditation. Sitting on the tatami mats, she inhaled deeply, allowing the fresh scent of tatami straw to fill her lungs. Over time, as her body tightened in a meditation pose, Irene let the environment wrap around her. She focused on her breath, the simple act of inhaling and exhaling grounding her thoughts. When tears finally spilled over her cheeks, each drop felt heavy with years of unexpressed pain. It was a release, as much as it was a silent acknowledgement of her struggles. At that moment, her hurt became a part of her journey, an essential chapter in her story, rather than something to be hidden away. In the depths of that silence, she began to feel that pain morphing into something deeper, a call that echoed the teachings of Pope Francis about humility and love. She sensed a connection between her past and a bigger purpose that could emerge from embracing her vulnerabilities. With each meditation session, fresh insights dawned on her. Her internal battles mirrored broader issues, struggles for compassion, in a world that often seemed devoid of it. During one particularly powerful moment in meditation, Irene envisioned her experiences woven together with the threads of the global community. The struggles of the indigenous populations she learned about alongside the letters from Father Miguel felt linked to her own emotional turmoil. Just as they sought justice and recognition, she sought to acknowledge her own pain. As she moved through the retreat, the sense of rebirth strengthened. During the group discussions, she found herself sharing her own journey with an authenticity that had been absent for long. Those conversations blossomed into a profound realization. The personal journey could harmonize with a larger shared mission of healing and action. The retreat's final day arrived, but instead of feeling like an end, it was an awakening. After a final meditative session, the instructor invited everyone to reflect on their experiences. As Irene sat next to a group of participants from various backgrounds, she felt the unity of their shared moments. Each story shared was a reminder that everyone weaves their journeys together, creating a colorful tapestry of human experience. With renewed energy, Irene committed to translating her pain into action. She envisioned ways to advocate for the values she held dear: compassion, understanding, and reconciliation. It was more than a mission. It was now a part of her identity. As she stood outside the retreat center, breathing in the familiar scent of cherry blossoms one last time, she felt renewed. The retreat had facilitated a rebirth. She would carry this experience into her life, igniting her path forward. As she headed home, Irene's heart brimmed with gratitude for the revelations she had uncovered. The silent sanctuary had not only helped her face her pain, but had transformed it into a driving force for change. The journey ahead still looked challenging, but she now welcomed it with open arms, resolved to take the lessons learned and turn them into compassionate action, both for herself and those around her. The world felt different now, full of potential and hope, and she was ready to embrace it fully. Back in Italy, Irene found herself standing before a formidable figure in the church, Cardinal Anselmo Silvani. He was well known for his traditional views and had a reputation for being an influential voice within the Vatican. Their encounter was set in Assisi, amidst the small stone buildings that had witnessed history. What was supposed to be a hopeful dialogue quickly turned into a high-stakes confrontation. Irene sat in a modest conference room, the air thick with tension, waiting for him to arrive. The walls, adorned with religious icons, felt like they were closing in on her. As Cardinal Anselmo entered, a sense of authority filled the room. He was a tall man with sharp features and a piercing gaze that seemed to cut right through Irene. She could feel her heart racing as she prepared herself to defend her interpretation of Pope Francis's message, one she had grown to cherish deeply during her journey. "Thank you for meeting with me, Cardinal," Irene began, trying to inject warmth into her voice despite the tightening in her chest. He nodded curtly, taking a seat across from her. "Let's get straight to the point," he said, his tone brisk. "I've read your writings and listened to your talks about the Pope's letters. Some of your interpretations concern me. They seem overly emotional." Irene felt a rush of indignation. "Emotional?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "With all due respect, Cardinal, the heart is a part of faith. Pope Francis spoke of love and compassion. His messages are meant to resonate on a personal level." Anselmo leaned in slightly, his eyes narrowing. "But do they not risk straying too far from doctrine? The change you advocate, while noble, may rattle the very foundations of the Church. We can't allow personal interpretations to redefine our beliefs." His words hit her hard. They weren't merely about differing views. They struck at the core of what she had been working towards. This was not just a clash of perspectives. It was a battle over the very essence of faith and how it could be experienced. Irene thought back to the retreat in Japan, where stillness had allowed her to hear her own heart. Now seated before this influential figure, the struggle felt monumental. "I respect the doctrine," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But the world is changing, Cardinal. People are looking for a faith that meets them where they are, one that speaks to their struggles and aspirations. If we ignore the emotional component, we risk becoming irrelevant." Cardinal Anselmo's expression hardened. "And what of the traditions that have sustained us? Are you willing to cast aside the caution that has kept the Church grounded? This could open a Pandora's box of interpretations that could spiral out of control, that could lead to chaos rather than peace." The tension in the room escalated as Irene reflected on his words. She understood the weight of tradition and the stability it had brought to many. Yet she couldn't help but feel that clinging to the past while the world evolved was not the answer. She tried to empathize with his concerns, but felt frustrated that he couldn't see the potential for healing that Francis's messages could usher in. As they continued the back and forth, Irene realized that her fight was not just personal, but part of a larger struggle within the Church. There was an invisible wall built from fear of change, one that she needed to confront. It became increasingly clear that her mission was not merely to be a messenger, but to be an advocate for an inclusive love that the world so desperately needed. "Cardinal, I believe that Pope Francis's vision has always been about expanding the circle of compassion," she said, her voice growing more passionate. "It's an invitation to step beyond our comfort zones. If we don't adapt, we risk becoming irrelevant to the very people we're meant to serve." The Cardinal's expression softened for just a moment, but his resolve remained firm. "And if this compassion leads to disarray, can you bear that burden? Can you accept the fallout if things do not go as you envision?" Irene could feel the weight of the question, igniting a fire deep within her. "I am willing to bear that burden, Cardinal. I have seen the impact that love can have on those who feel abandoned by the Church. I want to honor what Pope Francis represents, not just as a leader, but as a beacon of hope for all." In that moment, a fragile understanding formed between them. Their visions for the future might be miles apart, but Irene's commitment to advocacy hadn't wavered. She could see that even if the Cardinal's heart didn't fully embrace her perspective, there was a conversation kindling, a dialogue that could evolve into something meaningful over time. As their meeting drew to a close, Irene realized this exchange had tested her resolve, forcing her to articulate her beliefs under the scrutiny of someone who held the lines of tradition tightly. It was a defining moment for her, solidifying her role as a change-maker within the Church. More than ever, she understood the road ahead would not be simple, but she was willing to walk it. For her, it was not just about leading a dialogue, it was about fostering love, inclusion, and the belief that change, though challenging, could emerge from even the toughest conversations. With that sense of purpose burning brightly within her, she left the room, determined to continue her mission, even in the face of adversity. Irene's journey led her deep into the Amazon rainforest, a place rich with life and stories waiting to be told. The lush greenery and towering trees created an almost magical atmosphere, one where time seemed to stand still. Her desire to understand the multifaceted messages of Pope Francis had brought her here, to a land that embodied the struggles she had learned about from Father Miguel and the letters exchanged with indigenous leaders. As she arrived in a small village, she was greeted by a group of leaders who smoothly transitioned into dialogue, bringing their traditions and stories to light. It was stunning to see how the community took pride in their land, every smile hinting at a shared understanding of their place in the world. The elders welcomed her with open arms, their weathered faces telling tales of resilience and connection to the earth. Irene felt an instant bond as they spoke about the profound respect they held for the messages of Pope Francis. Their reverence for his words echoed the hope she had felt during her retreats and encounters with others advocating for change. As they settled around a fire, the atmosphere shifted, from light-hearted exchanges to deep, meaningful conversations about the conflict between modernity and their ancestral ways of life. Stories began to tumble out, each one weaving a larger tapestry of pain, resistance, and hope. Irene listened carefully, her heart heavy with empathy, as leaders described struggles over land rights, dispossession, and the devastation that came with encroaching development. These were not just stories. They were powerful testimonies of lives intertwined with the land that defined them. Feeling their anguish mirrored her own past battles, Irene recognized the deeper truths that lay beneath each narrative shared. These indigenous voices, which had been marginalized for so long, resonated with her quest for understanding. It was a realization that struck her like a lightning bolt. The challenges faced by these communities echoed around the world. They were engaged in a fight for their identity, much like her own struggle to find her place within the Church, and better articulate the inclusive vision of faith that she so ardently believed in. The wisdom of the elders surfaced as they shared insights on indigenous spirituality, emphasizing the sacred bond between nature and humanity. An old man with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor spoke slowly, providing space for the gravity of his words to settle. "The trees speak to us," he said, his voice steady. "They tell us about our place in this world, and how our spirits are tied to the land. To care for the earth is to care for ourselves, to find peace and balance." Irene felt a wave of emotion wash over her, realizing that the lessons embedded in these discussions went beyond their immediate struggles. They connected back to her own life's journey, offering a new perspective on her frustrations with the rigidity she encountered in discussions of faith. Here, among the voices of people who lived in harmony with nature, she found a deep, transformative wisdom that had been overlooked. In that moment of revelation, Irene committed herself to bringing these stories back to the broader world. The fight, the faith, and the resilience she had witnessed were powerful narratives that needed to be shared. She envisioned pathways to connect those lessons with Pope Francis's message of humility and love. This was the bridge she yearned to build, not only between disparate groups, but also between faith systems that could inspire collective action and solidarity. Emboldened by this experience, Irene began to draft her thoughts in a notebook she had carried with her, desperate to capture the energy and inspiration pulsing through her veins. She wanted to ensure that the voices of these indigenous leaders would not be silenced by the relentless pace of modernity. Each line she wrote reflected her commitment to advocate for the marginalized, infusing their wisdom into her own message, of which she had become an ardent proponent. As her time in the Amazon came to an end, Irene felt transformed. The bond she had formed with the land and its people was undeniable, and she understood now that her journey was intricately woven with theirs. She took a deep breath, overwhelmed with gratitude for the lessons learned. She was ready to return to Italy not just as a messenger of Pope Francis's vision, but as a vessel for the stories of those whose lives echoed the very truths he espoused. This was not merely a task. It was her calling, one fueled by a newfound sense of purpose, hope, and an unwavering desire to enact change. With the fire of resilience blazing in her heart, Irene stepped forward, ready to carry the message of love and understanding into a world that hungered for it. After returning to Italy, Irene felt as though she had emerged from a long journey, one filled with discoveries that had transformed her understanding of faith and connection. The lush greenery of the Amazon was still vivid in her mind, a stark contrast to the cobbled streets of Assisi where she now stood. But just when she thought she could settle back into her routine, an unexpected twist rocked her world. She learned of a second version of Pope Francis's letter, specifically addressed to an indigenous community in Brazil. This piece contained new passages that spoke eloquently about spirituality tied to the earth, weaving a deeper strand into the fabric of his original message. The news hit Irene like a wave crashing against the shore. How had she missed this? The urgency of this revelation ignited a fire within her. She immediately began her quest to uncover the details of this second letter, reaching out to anyone who might have access to its contents. Irene contacted scholars, activists, and religious leaders, each one promising to dig deeper into the Ida archives. She felt a blend of excitement and responsibility. This was not just about gathering information, it was about sharing wisdom that could resonate across cultures. Every phone call and email sent her heart racing with anticipation. She juggled her research amidst her daily life, often losing track of time as she became engrossed in the stories and histories of those she encountered. Each conversation brought new layers of meaning. People shared their experiences of living in harmony with nature, the spirituality that defined their communities, and the struggles they faced in maintaining their identities in a rapidly changing world. They echoed the urgency in her own heart, affirming that the message of Pope Francis was not merely a religious function, but a profound call to action. Yet, with each new piece of information, Irene felt the weight of responsibility growing heavier. This second letter challenged her initial interpretation of the first one. It suggested that there were deeper dimensions to what peace and reconciliation meant across different cultures. This wasn't just a simple shift, it felt monumental. She began to understand the importance of acknowledging those differences while striving for unity. The path to true reconciliation was layered with historical wounds and cultural contexts that required deep respect and understanding. As she delved further into her research, Irene found inspiring stories of how communities engaged with the environment and their spiritual practices intersected with the land. The threads of their narratives began to weave together in her mind, creating a tapestry of interconnectedness that resonated with the teachings of Pope Francis. He spoke of love, respect, and humility, values that echoed strongly in the words of those she had met during her time in the Amazon. Soon, the sense of urgency turned into a mission. Irene knew she had to share this newfound wisdom with others. The idea began to solidify in her mind. She would create a platform to bridge different spiritual traditions, emphasizing how they contributed to a larger, more inclusive understanding of peace. As she pieced together her thoughts, she realized that this was her calling, to be a messenger of the connections she so deeply believed in. She organized meetings with local community leaders and faith groups, sharing what she had learned, and urging them to embrace the principles of connection and respect she had encountered. Together, they could explore how their own traditions echoed the wisdom found in that second letter. A message that became ever more relevant as communities faced the challenges of modernity. Irene wasn't seeking recognition, she just wanted to be a part of a larger movement, one that promoted understanding, love, and the wisdom that lies in our shared humanity. As the days turned into weeks, Irene continued to immerse herself in research and community outreach. She felt invigorated by the warmth and energy that flowed from these interactions. It was as if the very essence of the second letter infused her spirit, reminding her that love and wisdom were the keys to unlocking the barriers that separated people. It became clear to her that the journey was not hers alone. It belonged to everyone willing to listen and respond. While uncertainty and doubt still lingered at the edges of her consciousness, Irene found courage in her convictions. Every time she shared the message she had been entrusted with, it felt like a piece of the puzzle clicked into place. There was something greater at work, a collective yearning for peace that transcended boundaries. With renewed determination, she set out to amplify those voices and to spread the message of love, connection, and respect that Pope Francis championed. In that moment, Irene knew she was not just uncovering a second version of a letter. She was participating in a transformation that resonated far beyond the words written on the page. She was becoming a part of a movement that could redefine what it meant to coexist, to honor the wisdom of the past while forging a more inclusive future. Irene took a deep breath, ready to embrace the countless stories yet to be told, as she continued her journey to spread the light of understanding into a world that needed it more than ever. As news of the second version of the letter spread, throughout the church it created ripples of excitement and tension alike. Irene found herself at the center of a whirlwind, thrust into the limelight as the media caught wind of her quest for understanding the deeper meanings embedded in Pope Francis's teachings. With each passing day, her phone buzzed incessantly, with requests for interviews, discussions, and collaborative efforts with various social movements seeking to rally around her message of inclusive faith. But as the spotlight grew brighter on her, so did the scrutiny from Cardinal Anselmo Silvani. He watched with increasing concern as Irene became the face of a new wave of faith, one that seemed to threaten the traditional values he held dear. In meetings, he became more vocal about his disapproval of her activities. "You're playing a dangerous game, Irene," he warned during one tense discussion. His voice was firm and his gaze unwavering. "The Church has a legacy to protect, and your interpretation could inspire unrest among the faithful." Irene listened carefully, but held her ground. "Cardinal, I believe the Pope's message is meant to evoke conversations about love and unity, not division. I'm not here to undermine the Church. I'm trying to expand our understanding of it." Her heart raced, but she felt a steady determination rise within her. Each encounter with the Cardinal only fueled her resolve to push forward, to share what she had learned, and make the Church a space for all voices, especially those that had been historically ignored. Despite the pressure, Irene thrived in her new role. She was energized by the support she received from the diverse individuals who had been drawn to her message. Activists, community leaders, and those who sought a space for open dialogue began rallying around her. They were all eager to explore how spirituality could intersect with social justice, melding the teachings of the Church with the deep-seated need for advocacy in their communities. With every conversation, Irene felt the power of collective action. It wasn't just her fight anymore. It was a movement infused with hope. But with that hope came challenges. The opposition from conservative voices, particularly from Cardinal Anselmo, began to escalate. He used the platforms available to him, expressing his concerns in sermons and writings that emphasized the dangers of straying from traditional doctrine. He painted Irene's endeavors as reckless, portraying her as someone lost in her emotions and out to distort the Church's message. This only intensified her determination. What could have been a time filled with fear became an invitation to courage for Irene. She decided that rather than retreating into silence or doubt, she would boldly continue to share the message of peace she had gleaned from her time in the Amazon and from the second letter. She organized community gatherings where she shared her insights and listened to others' stories. Each event felt like a small revolution as people came together, transcending barriers of faith and background, united by a shared desire for understanding. Irene learned to navigate the delicate dance of expressing her truth while standing firm against the tide of resistance. It was a balancing act that often left her emotionally drained. The weight of the fight for her faith felt heavy, but where fatigue could have led her to complacency, it instead ignited a fire within her. Each challenge she faced provided her with fuel to persist. The emotional toll of the struggle made the cause all the more urgent and authentic in her eyes. As the weeks passed, Irene began to realize that her journey was as much about her growth as it was about the messages she wanted to convey. She found strength not only in the bravery that came from speaking her truth, but also in the solidarity of those who stood beside her. Every time Cardinal Anselmo's voice of dissent echoed in her ears, she countered it with reminders of the love and compassion that were central to her understanding of faith. Determined to embrace her role as an agent of change, Irene grasped the heart of what Pope Francis had advocated, a call for a new way forward that embraced diversity and compassion. In a world that seemed increasingly divided, she found clarity in her mission. She was not just representing herself. She was embodying the voices of countless individuals yearning for a space within the Church that celebrated rather than alienated. Feeling invigorated, Irene set her sights on the future. She envisioned a gathering of like-minded people, an event where diverse practices and beliefs could come together to celebrate spirituality in all its forms. It would be a bold statement against the conservative rhetoric that sought to stifle dialogue. She started drafting plans, reaching out to community leaders, and even inviting Cardinal Anselmo in hopes of bridging differences rather than building walls. Despite the growing pressure, Irene embraced this new chapter with open arms. She was learning to turn adversity into opportunity, understanding that every moment of conflict could be a step toward deeper connection and understanding. As she continued her journey, she remained resolute in her belief that love and wisdom could indeed illuminate the path to unity in a world desperate for peace. The day of the International Conference on Spirituality and Reconciliation arrived with an electric buzz that filled the air. Irene stood backstage, nervously reviewing her notes one last time. She was about to take the stage as one of the keynote ER speakers, a role that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. This was a pivotal moment for her, not just to present her ideas, but to embody the message of Pope Francis: love, unity, and a call to action for all of humanity. As she listened to the murmurs of the crowd, a knot formed in her stomach. She could see a diverse group of people in the auditorium below, each individual carrying their own stories, struggles, and hopes. They had gathered to hear about reconciliation in a world that often felt divided. Irene took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She stepped onto the stage, the spotlight hitting her face, momentarily blinding her, but also illuminating the path ahead. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice shaky but warm. As she spoke about love and the importance of connecting across cultures, she felt a wave of passion flood her. Yet, intertwined with that enthusiasm, was the overwhelming pressure of expectations, the expectation to be the voice of change, to articulate the ideals of a higher faith, and to do so flawlessly. The words flowed easily until they began to shift, becoming heavier with the weight of her experiences. Suddenly, as she recounted her journey through the Amazon and the moment she connected with the indigenous communities, it became too much. The years of internal struggle, the battles against cultural norms, the pain of feeling misunderstood, it all surged to the surface like a tidal wave. "This isn't just about us or the Church," Irene said, her voice cracking. And then, the dam broke. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she felt a raw wave of vulnerability wash over her. "It's about the very essence of humanity." The audience fell silent, their eyes wide with surprise and empathy. Irene stood there, trembling, feeling both exposed and liberated. This was not the polished narrative she had rehearsed. Instead, it was an honest reflection of her heart. It was a moment of breaking down the walls that often kept people, her included, feeling isolated in their struggles. As she choked back sobs, something shifted in the room. The collective air of expectation transformed into one of compassion and understanding. The reaction was immediate and powerful. As Irene held herself together, embracing her vulnerability, she began to sense the energy of the crowd shift. People seemed drawn to her honesty. Some began nodding, others reached out with supportive gasps. The weight of her emotional collapse was not seen as a failure. It was viewed as an invitation for everyone present to embrace their own humanity. After a few long moments, she found her voice again. "What I learned," she continued, her voice steadier now, is that true strength is found in our emotions, in our vulnerabilities. We must be willing to show our scars, because they connect us. They remind us that we are all on this journey together, each of us striving for peace and understanding. The audience was alive with murmurs of agreement and encouragement. Some members stood up, acknowledging her with heartfelt applause. The sound echoed through the room, wrapping around Irene like a warm embrace. The huge burden of isolation she had felt began to lift, replaced by a realization that she wasn't in this fight alone. The emotional honesty she had shared resonated with many, becoming a source of collective strength. Irene left the stage feeling like she had shared not just her story, but also the stories of those who had been silenced, those who felt lost in their struggles. The emotional clarity she experienced ignited something in her and in the audience. The connection reached beyond her personal plight and formed a community eager for change and reconciliation. As she stepped off the stage, she was greeted by a cascade of support from attendees. People approached her, sharing their own experiences of hurt and healing, expressing gratitude for her honesty. Each conversation reminded her that the rawness she had shown was a bridge for others to connect and share, and in those interactions, there lay the seeds of transformation. Irene realized that this moment of vulnerability opened a new chapter in her life. It wasn't just about being a representative of a faith, but about fostering unity through shared experiences. Understanding and compassion could flourish when they were nurtured in the fertile ground of emotional authenticity. She felt hopeful, invigorated even, knowing that true change often began with open hearts. What started as a moment of emotional collapse had transformed into a powerful catalyst for connection and understanding. Irene walked through the crowd, encouraged by the faces around her, each one reflecting the same desire for peace, love, and reconciliation. This was how she envisioned faith, a tapestry woven from the threads of human experience, collective struggles, and a communal yearning for a better world. Each person she met felt like a step toward creating a more compassionate future, reminding her that even in moments of collapse, there is always the potential for growth and rebirth. After the intense experience at the conference, Irene felt the weight of her emotions pressing down on her. The collapse had been a turning point, a moment that demanded freshness in her approach to both faith and connection. Seeking solace, she returned to Assisi, a place that felt like home, yet filled with memories that could be both comforting and painful. It was there that she hoped to find understanding and companionship in her sister, Maria Teresa. The sisters had always shared a complicated relationship, shaped by their differing paths in life. As Irene approached Maria Teresa's small apartment, she felt a flutter of anxiety mixed with hope. It had been some time since they had seen each other, and the distance between them had grown as each pursued her own journey, often in opposite directions. Irene knocked softly on the door, and when Maria Teresa opened it, a warm smile broke across her face, although it was tinged with uncertainty. "Irene," she said, embracing her sister tightly, "you look worn out." "Long story, Irene," replied with a weak smile, stepping inside. The apartment was filled with familiar scents of herbs and spices from the kitchen, reminding her of their childhood. They settled on the worn couch, a little piece of their shared past. After a moment of silence, Maria Teresa asked, "Do you want to talk about it?" Her voice was gentle, genuinely concerned. It opened a doorway to a conversation that had long been waiting to happen. Irene took a deep breath, feeling vulnerable yet ready to share. "I had a rough day at the conference. I thought I could inspire change, but it all overwhelmed me. I showed my weakest side." She bit her lip, recalling how she had poured her heart out, only to feel exposed. Maria Teresa nodded, understanding flooding her features. "You were being authentic, and that takes courage," she said. But I know how it feels to be weighed down by expectations. I've struggled with my own choices. That admission caught Irene's attention. What do you mean? You've always seemed so sure of your path. Maria Teresa sighed and looked away for a brief moment, gathering her thoughts. I chose a different life, one outside the church. You know that. But sometimes I wonder if it was the right decision. I missed out on a lot. I just wish you could understand why I left. Feeling a surge of emotions, Irene leaned forward. I never judged you for that, but I always felt there was so much between us that we never really talked about. The conversation unfolded. Both sisters unveiled their stories, each sharing their wounds and aspirations. They found themselves delving into the struggles they had faced, the disappointments, the joys that had shaped their paths, the inadequate understanding of one another over the years. The vulnerable exchange replaced previous misunderstandings, with a chance for healing. I felt alone in my journey, Irene confessed. You've followed a different calling, leaving me to carry the weight of this spiritual fight alone. But hearing your struggles makes me realize we're not as different as I thought. Maria Teresa smiled softly. Exactly. We both have been searching for authenticity in different ways. It doesn't diminish either of our paths. Their dialogue flowed freely, filled with tears and laughter, as unspoken words bridged the gaps of years lost. Together, they began exploring what it meant to be faithful to their values and the struggles that came with those choices. It was a dialogue filled with empathy, free of judgment, a sanctuary where they could be genuine without fear of reproach. In that space, they became reflections of one another, their journeys intertwining in ways that revealed profound connections. The tension that once existed began to dissolve, replaced by mutual understanding and forgiveness. There was power in naming their pains, and both women began to feel lighter. I guess what I'm learning is that connection is the essence of healing, Irene said, wiping away a tear. If we can share our truths, we can empower each other to keep going. Maria Teresa took her hand, squeezing it tightly. And it's also allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. Sometimes, that's the toughest part. The gravity of their conversation culminated in a moment of realization. They were no longer just sisters with separate lives. They were allies in a shared mission to embrace truth, love, and faith in its many forms. Irene felt a renewed sense of strength, inspired by her sister's revelations, and Maria Teresa found a rekindled connection to her own spiritual journey. As the sun began to dip behind the hills of Assisi, casting a warm glow in the room, Irene sensed a shift within herself. This meeting was not just a reunion. It symbolized a turning point, the shedding of old fears, and an embrace of what lay ahead. I need to take this newfound connection back with me into my work, Irene said, her voice firm with determination. It's time to bring our messages together, to weave a narrative that speaks to the heart. Then let's do it, together, Maria Teresa replied, her eyes sparkling with newfound clarity. It was no longer about distance or different paths. It was about unity. And in that heartfelt exchange, surrounded by love and understanding, both women stepped forward into the light, ready to face their futures not as solitary travelers but as a united front, empowered to share their stories and continue their healing journey together. Irene's heart raced as she flipped through the pages of her notes, trying to piece together the new revelations about Pope Francis's letter. In a whirlwind of unexpected discoveries, she learned that the letter had been penned following a poignant conversation he had with Syrian refugees in 2024. The weight of this knowledge washed over her like a tidal wave. Their stories of suffering and resilience echoed deeply within her, shouting that the struggles of those lost in the throes of conflict were intricately tied to her own journey of faith. This was more than just a letter. It was a lifeline woven through shared human experiences. As she reflected on the harsh realities faced by the refugees, Irene found herself wrestling with complex emotions: sorrow for their pain, admiration for their courage, and a rekindled fire within to do something meaningful. The narrative that had started as a personal mission expanded into a broader call for understanding that transcended her comfort zone. "This is what it means to truly embrace the spirit of compassion," she murmured to herself, feeling a surge of energy. As her understanding deepened, Irene felt compelled to seek out these refugees, to listen to their stories and share the essence of the letter that now held new meaning. It was not enough to just be a voice for change. She wanted to connect with them on a personal level, to understand their lives in the context of the Pope's powerful message. With each passing moment, Irene realized her mission had shifted from simply being a messenger of faith to embodying an active love that could bring about real transformation in the world. Setting out on this new path felt both thrilling and daunting. She connected with various organizations that supported refugees, eventually finding herself scheduled to meet with a small group in a nearby community center dedicated to providing assistance and resources for displaced individuals. The day of the meeting arrived, and Irene stood outside the center, her heart pounding. She could see families waiting, children playing, and adults engaged in quiet conversations. Each face seemed to carry a story, one that begged to be heard and understood. Once inside, Irene was greeted warmly by the staff and the refugees, but she almost felt an overwhelming wave of inadequacy wash over her. What could she possibly say or do that could compare to the hardships they faced? However, as she introduced herself and started explaining why she was there, she leaned into the vulnerability that had become her strength. "I'm here because I believe your stories are important," she said, glancing around at the attentive faces before her. "Pope Francis wrote a letter inspired by conversations just like this one, and I want to learn from you." The room exuded a sense of warmth and openness, and soon the atmosphere shifted. Refugees began to share their experiences, tales filled with heartache but also with remarkable resilience and hope. One woman, Fatima, spoke of losing her home and her struggle to find a sense of normalcy for her children. Her voice was steady but laced with pain. A young man named Ahmed shared his journey fleeing from violence, igniting dreams of a future where he could feel safe again. With every story, Irene felt her heart expand. Their words were heavy with reality, yet rich with inspiration. As they shared, Irene took note of how each account mirrored the struggles she had faced herself, battles with faith, the desire for connection, and a quest for understanding. In those moments, she felt something shift deep within her. She wasn't just sharing a message. She was participating in a dialogue of empathy, a powerful connection that crossed barriers and languages. After the stories were shared, Irene was overwhelmed with emotion. "Thank you for trusting me with your experiences," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "They are part of a larger narrative of unity that I believe can heal our world." The group responded with nods and smiles, connecting with the sincerity in her words. They began discussing how they could share the message of hope the Pope had emphasized, and Irene realized she wasn't alone in her mission. She had become part of a collective effort to shed light on the fundamental aspects of humanity: kindness, love, and the shared bond of suffering. As the meeting wrapped up, Irene knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. She felt invigorated by the hope she had witnessed. The message of Pope Francis, once just a theoretical pursuit for her, was now alive in the voices of those who had been marginalized. Walking away from the center, Irene felt empowered. She understood now that her journey was about amplifying the voices of others and carrying forth their stories into the broader dialogue of faith and spirituality. She was no longer merely a messenger. She had become a defender of a love rooted in action, a passion to advocate for those seeking refuge and acceptance. Stepping into the sunlight, she took a deep breath, feeling a renewed sense of purpose surge through her. The path ahead was clear. She would take their stories to heart and allow them to guide her as she continued her own journey. Each encounter would be a testament to the strength of humanity and a reminder that, together, they could light the way toward a more compassionate world. As the message of Pope Francis's letter continued to reverberate through the world, a new interim pope stepped into the spotlight, bringing with him a sense of hope and renewal. His name was Marco, and his charisma was undeniable. He had a special way of connecting with people, understanding their struggles, and recognizing the importance of giving a voice to women and marginalized communities within the Church. It felt like a fresh start, not just for the Vatican, but for those eager to see real change. One crisp morning, Irene received an unexpected invitation for a private audience with Pope Marco. Her heart raced with excitement and trepidation as she walked through the grand halls of the Vatican. The walls seemed to echo with history, but today felt different. Today, she was not just a visitor. She was a pivotal part of a greater narrative. When she entered the Pope's private study, she was met with a warm smile that put her at ease. "Irene," he said, gesturing for her to sit down. "I've been following your journey closely. Your efforts to amplify the voices of others are inspiring." His eyes sparkled with sincerity. Feeling a mix of humility and pride, Irene replied, "Thank you, Your Holiness. I believe the message of compassion and unity is one we all must embrace." Pope Marco nodded, leaning forward with an air of earnestness. "This is exactly why I want you to join a newly formed council. Our aim is to interpret and apply the legacy of Pope Francis, and I believe your voice is essential in that process." Irene felt a flurry of emotions wash over her. This was a significant opportunity, a chance to have a genuine impact in the Church. Yet, it also felt daunting. She recognized that this new position came with immense responsibility. "I would be honored," she said, trying to steady the excitement racing within her. As the Pope elaborated on the Council's purpose, Irene's mind raced with possibility. This could be her platform to further the ideals she had been fighting for, but she was aware that her new role might not be universally welcomed. The challenge was clear. Her journey toward leadership within the Church would require not just passion, but also resilience in the face of resistance. As the days turned into weeks, Irene immersed herself in her new responsibilities. The Council convened regularly, featuring a diverse group of voices that represented a range of perspectives. Each meeting offered moments of revelation, with members exchanging ideas on how to bring the Church into a new era of inclusivity and compassion. However, Irene soon felt the pressure mounting against her from both within and outside the Church. Traditionalists raised their eyebrows at her involvement, questioning whether a woman could truly grasp the intricacies of Church doctrine. Skeptics pointed to her emotional journey and wondered if she could maintain the necessary gravitas in such a vital role. Instead of retreating, Irene leaned into these challenges. She transformed the skepticism into fuel, using it to bolster her commitment to the ideals she cherished. "Our spirituality must evolve," she would assert passionately in council meetings. "It's all about connection, forming relationships that honor everyone's humanity, especially those who have been silenced." With each challenge, she displayed an unwavering courage. More than that, she acknowledged her own journey of transformation as a source of strength. She was no longer just a messenger. She was a part of the dialogue, a leading figure who understood the weight of both her own experiences and those of the people she represented. As she navigated the complexities of her role, Irene also realized that humility was essential. She made it a point to listen to the experiences and concerns of others, particularly those who felt voiceless. By doing so, she fostered a collaborative atmosphere that encouraged dialogue, awareness, and unity. In one significant meeting, Irene spoke about the importance of understanding the perspectives of marginalized communities when interpreting Pope Francis's teachings. Her words resonated, and she could see the shift in attitudes. Slowly, the council began transforming from a formal committee into a supportive family, united in their mission to amplify love and activism within the spiritual landscape of the Church. As Irene settled into her new role, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The resistance she faced acted as a catalyst, propelling her to work even harder to embody the message of love and activism that Pope Francis had left behind. Days became weeks, and weeks turned into months, yet her resolve never wavered. With every step forward, she solidified her understanding that changes in the Church could only come through a mix of patience, perseverance, and presence. Irene was not just carving a path for herself, she was paving the way for countless voices that deserved to be heard within the sacred halls of the Vatican. Embracing her role as a leader would take time, but she was committed to transforming the resistance into a movement, one that would resonate with the message of love, compassion, and unity echoing throughout the world. And finally, as she stood before the council one day, addressing her fellow members with a sense of urgency in her voice, she felt as though she was exactly where she was meant to be, all along. With courage and humility, Irene was ready to lead the way into a new chapter for the Church, fueled by the stories of those who inspired her every day. During a particularly lively meeting of the council, Irene found herself lost in thought, reflecting on the many ups and downs of her journey over the past year. The discussions often revolved around the legacy that Pope Francis left behind, a mix of hope and action. As various members passionately shared their views on inclusivity and justice, Irene felt the energy in the room. It was during this session that she stumbled upon a pivotal revelation. Pope Francis had left behind specific instructions about centering women of deep faith in the new spirituality he envisioned. The words hit her like a jolt. Suddenly, it all made sense. The restless spirit that had driven her to challenge norms and seek connection was validated. She was not just acting on impulse, she was responding to a call that echoed in the hearts of many. The idea that women should be at the forefront of this new wave resonated deeply within her. It was as if she had been handed a baton in a relay race, and suddenly the course was clearer. The thought of leading a movement inspired her. Irene's imagination sparked with possibilities. What if we gathered women from different traditions, faiths, and backgrounds? She posed to her fellow council members, her voice steady with purpose. We could create a collective effort to amplify our voices and manifest the unity Pope Francis envisioned. Her suggestion hung in the air, charged with potential. It was as if a light bulb had flickered on for everyone in the room. The council members nodded in agreement, some smiling in encouragement. "Let's do it," one member said with enthusiasm. "Women have often been sidelined in discussions of faith and spirituality. It's time we change that." Empowered by the counterpoint of enthusiasm, Irene began brainstorming a plan. The group decided to hold a gathering of women, inviting participants from various faith communities, all willing to contribute to a movement dedicated to peace and reconciliation. "We will honor the diverse traditions represented," she said, noting how their shared experiences of struggle and resilience could create a tapestry of voices calling for change. As news of the meeting spread, Irene felt a wave of excitement. Women began reaching out from all directions, eager to join a collective effort. Eventually, they settled on a central location, a beautiful community center in downtown Rome that felt warm and inviting. It was the perfect backdrop for a gathering meant to ignite hope. When the day arrived, Irene looked around the room filled with women. There were activists, mothers, scholars, and artists, all present with a shared desire to amplify hope and action. It felt as if they were part of something sacred. Irene stood at the front, her heart racing with anticipation. "Thank you for coming here today. We are here to celebrate our diverse backgrounds and unite for a common goal, to promote peace, reconciliation, and understanding in our communities." The energy in the room was palpable, and as each woman shared her story, the connections deepened. They talked about the challenges they faced, the stereotypes they battled, and the hopes they held for a better future. Together, they began brainstorming, actions that could showcase their commitment to peace and unity. "Let's host community events where we engage in dialogue and share our traditions," one woman suggested. We could also create service projects to offer assistance to those who are struggling in our neighborhoods. As ideas flowed, Irene marveled at how this gathering reflected the spirit of empathy and solidarity. Armed with shared experiences and a promise of unity, they were ready to face the world. With each plan laid out, Irene recognized this wasn't merely a movement meant to highlight their voices. It was grounded in the understanding that every story mattered and that collective voices could ignite real change. The weeks that followed were filled with action. They organized events, inviting community members to participate in open discussions about faith, culture, and reconciliation. Whether it was sharing food, storytelling, or even hosting workshops on healing, each encounter reinforced their commitment to kindness and understanding. Through it all, Irene felt the whispers of Pope Francis guiding her, strengthening her resolve to tackle the challenges within and outside the Church. This was not just about amplifying women's voices. It was about creating a nurturing space for connection, a safe haven that honored their diverse traditions while striving for a shared sense of purpose. With every successful event, Irene noticed the differences they were making. Communities began to come together, breaking down barriers and fostering understanding. An unbreakable thread of solidarity began weaving itself through the fabric of their actions, reminding all involved that they were part of something larger than themselves. Eventually, Irene understood that this movement stemmed from the ashes of loss and heartbreak, fueled by love and the promise of change. Transformation was not always easy, but through this collective effort, she felt reinvigorated in her mission. Together, they sought to reach those who needed hope most, those living in despair, offering them not just words, but the tangible proof that a united front could indeed foster peace and healing. As the weeks passed, Irene looked around at the women she had gathered, feeling a sense of gratitude wash over her. They were standing shoulder to shoulder, not just fighting for their own voices, but for all. It felt as if they were igniting a fire that would spread far beyond them, a fire of solidarity, compassion, and resilience that the world truly needed. And armed with that spirit, they moved confidently toward the future they were ready to shape together. After what felt like an eternity of struggles and transformations, the moment finally arrived. The complete letter from Pope Francis was published, and it sent waves of excitement through the hearts of many around the world. This was not just any letter. It was a profound defense of peace and a heartfelt rallying cry for action through a new movement called Fraternitas. As Irene sifted through the words on the page, a chill ran down her spine. This was far more than just a collection of thoughts. It was an invitation to embrace community, understanding, and love. News of the letter spread like wildfire. Social media buzzed with messages of encouragement and snippets of the letter that highlighted its core themes. Messages of solidarity poured in from every direction as individuals and organizations began announcing their own initiatives inspired by the call to action encapsulated in the letter. Irene watched in awe as people rallied to form community groups, organize peaceful protests, and launch service projects designed to uplift those in need. It was thrilling to see so many people embrace the idea of fraternity that the Pope had envisioned. Irene soon found herself thrust into an unexpected role. With her deep ties to the community and her experience navigating the journey of transformation over the past year, others began looking to her for guidance. "You've been at the forefront of this movement already," one friend pointed out during a community meeting. "Your voice matters. We need you to help us lead this effort." Caught off guard, Irene felt a swirl of emotions. She had never sought the spotlight and often preferred to work behind the scenes. But as she stood there, surrounded by familiar faces filled with hope, she realized that this was not just about her. This was about everyone who had been touched by the desire for change. They were ready to unite, and perhaps her journey could be a symbol for the possibilities that lay ahead. As she accepted this newfound leadership role, her first move was to gather her friends and fellow advocates to brainstorm how they could mobilized the Fraternitas movement in their local area. They started with a planning session, gathered in a cozy cafe that had become their regular meeting spot. Over cups of coffee and pastries, they discussed the various elements of the movement: education, service, and outreach. "Why don't we start with community events?" suggested Kelly, one of Irene's closest friends. "We could organize workshops to teach people about different cultures, maybe include potluck dinners where everyone brings a dish from their traditions." Irene loved the idea. It was practical and would help build connections among diverse groups. It would not just be about talking, it would be about experiencing fellowship. "Let's also include discussions about the importance of empathy and unity," she added. "We need to foster understanding between different faiths and cultures, especially now when there seems to be so much division." As the group got to work, Irene felt a renewed sense of purpose. They scheduled their first community event for the following month. The anticipation grew as the word spread, and volunteers signed up to help. Each flyer posted, and every social media post generated buzz that was impossible to ignore. When the day of the event arrived, Irene stood in front of the community center, taking a moment to breathe and soak in the atmosphere. Excitement mingled with nerves, but she reminded herself why they were there. This was about fostering connections, building bridges, and embracing a universal call for fraternity. As people began to arrive, Irene watched in wonder at the diverse mix of attendees. Families, students, elderly couples, and even local businesses had come together. They shared stories, danced, cooked, and laughed without regard for the barriers that had traditionally divided them. Throughout the day, Irene facilitated discussions, sharing snippets of the letter and encouraging others to voice their own thoughts. The energy in the room was palpable. People were eager to engage, to learn, and to collaborate. The sense of community blossomed, and Irene felt a warmth fill her heart as she realized that this was just the beginning. With each event, the Fraternitas movement began to take a more defined shape. It morphed into not just a series of activities, but a grassroots movement fueled by the very people it aimed to serve. Irene's role as a leader began to feel less daunting and more like a responsibility she was proud to bear. Slowly, she grew into the image of hope that had formed around her, the embodiment of the ideals in the letter. In the months that followed, as Fraternitas took root in various communities, Irene often found herself reflecting on her journey. The love and support she was receiving became a source of strength, and she knew that the movement was much larger than her individual efforts. It was a collective rising of voices that celebrated diversity and healed divisions. The letter had created a spark. With each new action taken, each new story shared, the message of fraternity grew louder and more resonant. The world was beginning to change before her eyes, and Irene was honored to play a part in that transformation. Now, surrounded by a community of passionate individuals all striving for a better future, Irene felt hopeful as she recognized that they were finally creating the world they had all envisioned, a world built on the foundation of empathy, hope, and love. With the Fraternitas movement gaining momentum, Irene found herself swept into a whirlwind of activity that took her to conventions, interfaith gatherings, and cultural celebrations. Each event was a tapestry of voices and ideas, rich with the colors of diversity. As she moved through these spaces, she felt a growing sense of belonging and purpose. The hustle and bustle of people from all walks of life filled her with energy, and she reveled in the opportunity to witness various spiritual practices, each unique, yet interconnected by a common thread of humanity. At one interfaith conference in the heart of San Francisco, Irene met people whose beliefs spanned the globe. There were Buddhist monks sharing their insights on mindfulness, Hindu women discussing the power of community through their festivals, and Christian activists focused on social justice. This gathering felt like a vibrant spectrum of faith, illuminating the beauty that arises when differences are embraced rather than shunned. Conversations flowed freely, And Irene found herself sharing her experiences as a Catholic, but more importantly, listening to the stories of others. Her heart swelled with admiration as she learned about their struggles and triumphs. Each story, shared in a circle of respect, deepened her understanding of what it means to seek and honor spirituality. She began to see that her journey of faith was not a solitary path. Instead, it was part of a broader journey toward unity and collaboration. Discussions were not merely academic or theoretical. They were filled with genuine concerns about the world and a fervent hope for what could be achieved together. Irene enjoyed lively debates about how different spiritual values could inform actions against poverty and injustice. It was invigorating to feel the collective power of passion in the room, energized by a shared commitment to create positive change. With each interaction, Irene felt the call of Pope Francis echo in her heart. One afternoon, after a particularly inspiring session on environmental stewardship prompted by faith communities, Irene found a quiet corner to reflect on her experiences. She gazed out at the Golden Gate Bridge, its towering presence a reminder of the connections being forged among diverse communities. It struck her that unity was more than just coming together. It was about lifting each other up, acknowledging shared struggles, and celebrating victories regardless of their backgrounds. "This is what it means to embrace a new spirituality," she whispered to herself. "It's a spirit of resilience that thrives on collaboration." Returning to the conference, Irene noticed a group gathering around a stage where community leaders were preparing to showcase their local initiatives. Each project highlighted was filled with stories of human resilience and hope. Food banks, operated by faith groups, youth programs designed to empower the next generation, and interfaith dialogues that focused on healing divides. Irene joined the crowd, feeling a buzz of excitement as she watched various leaders passionately speak about their work. It reminded her of her own efforts with Fraternitas. Despite their differences, the audience came together in appreciation of the different flavors of faith and goodwill. The air felt electric. She could almost touch the sense of possibility lingering in the atmosphere. With newfound energy, Irene decided to bring the same spirit back to her community. She envisioned creating intimate gatherings where individuals could share their stories, as she had seen at the conference. She believed that local community members would be eager to connect, even those who had seemingly little in common. When Irene returned home, the idea fueled her. Over the next few weeks, she organized a series of small meetups, inviting individuals from various backgrounds to share meals and their experiences with one another. The first dinner was small, but effective, with around 15 people sitting around a long table in her living room. As they shared traditional dishes from their own cultures, laughter filled the air and stories flowed. The warmth of those gatherings ignited something powerful within Irene. She realized her own faith journey was enriched and transformed through the stories of others. Through sharing a meal and listening with an open heart, participants began to break down their preconceptions and fears. It reinforced her belief that a community built on love, resilience, and mutual respect had the potential to transform even the darkest moments into light. As the group met regularly, Irene could see the ripple effects of their actions. Friendships formed, bridges built over cups of tea, and shared laughter led to collaborative efforts in the community. Together, they organized a local service day, where members of all faiths came together to clean up a nearby park and provide food for those in need. The joy that filled her heart was profound, affirming her belief that their collective energy would sow the seeds of change not only locally but eventually spread to a global scale. It was in this new reality that she understood that the journey of faith, enriched by connection and understanding, could indeed transform lives. Through this experience, Irene reaffirmed her commitment to the principles of Fraternitas and the beautiful tapestry of humanity woven together by shared compassion and love. With Pope Francis's message behind her, she felt a powerful momentum that would forever shape her own journey, a united force for good, continuing to rise amid adversity and fracture, fueled by the essential need for understanding in the world. As the Fraternitas movement continued to blossom, a shift in the air became palpable. While many embraced the message of inclusivity and connection, not everyone welcomed these changes. The conservative factions of the church, led by the stern and unyielding Dom Anselmo, began to voice their dissent. They viewed Irene's efforts, along with those of her fellow leaders, as a direct challenge to the traditions that they held dear. It was during a church meeting in a small, sunlit conference room that Irene first confronted the tension head-on. The atmosphere was thick with apprehension as members of the congregation gathered, anticipating the topics at hand. Irene took a deep breath, reminding herself of the purpose behind her work. She was there not just to share her perspectives, but to listen to the concerns of others. Still, as Dom Anselmo entered the room, a feeling of unease settled over the attendees. "Let's address the elephant in the room," Dom Anselmo declared, his voice steady and authoritative. "This so-called Fraternitas movement claims to promote unity, but it risks distorting our core beliefs." He shot a pointed look at Irene, and the tension tightened. He was determined to defend the orthodoxy that he believed was being threatened. Irene felt the weight of his words, but stood her ground. "Dom Anselmo, with all due respect, I believe Fraternitas seeks to enhance our understanding of faith. We're not here to challenge doctrine, but to embody the love and service that Pope Francis advocates," she replied, her voice calm, although her heart raced. This was not just a discussion. It felt like a battle for the future of their community's spirit. As the dialogue unfolded, Irene listened as others voiced their concerns about integrating modern views into traditional practices. "What's next?" questioned one elderly member. "Will we change how we celebrate Mass? Our customs have deep roots, and they should not be disregarded." The conversations danced on a fine line between respect for history and the need for evolution. Irene nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the heart behind the resistance. "I understand the fear of losing what has always guided us," she said gently. "But could we consider that our traditions can coexist with new understandings? Change doesn't mean abandoning our roots. It could mean deepening our connection to our community and each other." Dom Anselmo scoffed slightly, crossing his arms. "You speak of love and service, but what of doctrine? The Church is built on centuries of established teachings. We cannot simply rewrite our beliefs for the sake of pleasing everyone." Irene took a moment to reflect on his words. "I respect that. But what if our doctrines evolve to include more of humanity? Isn't that what Jesus would have wanted? To open the doors wider, rather than keeping them firmly closed?" The cane room fell silent, and Irene could feel the weight of her challenge hanging in the air. She recognized that she was not only confronting Dom Anselmo, she was standing against generations of beliefs that many held closely. It was daunting and, yet it felt essential. Engagement in this conversation could bridge the gap she saw widening between the conservative views and the fresh visions of spirituality emerging around her. In the weeks that followed, Irene found herself repeatedly facing similar tensions. While Dom Anselmo was often the most vocal opponent, other conservative voices emerged, each expressing concerns ranging from the fear of watering down the faith to worries about losing community cohesiveness. Irene understood their concerns, but it was becoming increasingly clear to her that the essence of faith lay in its ability to adapt and resonate with the lives of its followers. Throughout each encounter, Irene balanced her values of courage and humility. She listened to the pushback with grace and empathy, knowing that many were struggling to find common ground between their cherished traditions and the call for a more inclusive approach to spirituality. Irene made it her mission to foster a sense of dialogue, where any opposition could become a learning opportunity rather than a battle. As she navigated these complex conversations, Irene recognized that her commitment to an inclusive spirituality needed to be matched with an understanding of the roots of that opposition. She often reminded herself that they were all on their own journeys of faith. She began inviting some of those critics to casual lunch discussions, aiming to foster deeper relationships outside the pressure of Formal settings. One day, following a community service event, Irene sat down with Dom Anselmo. She offered him a cup of coffee, hoping to engage him in a more personal conversation. "I can see your passion for our traditions, and I respect that," she began. "But can we talk about what faith means to both of us? I think there might be common ground we can find." To her surprise, he softened a bit. "I appreciate you reaching out, Irene. It's easy to become entrenched in our views, especially when we feel the very essence of our faith is at stake. Perhaps I've been too quick to dismiss the ideas you're bringing to light." The two began to share their stories, what had brought them to their interpretations of faith, and how they envisioned the future of their community. It was a spark of hope for Irene, a chance to grow amidst the differences, a reminder that the truth could transcend division, leading to productive conversations about tradition and modernity. Through these interactions and the drive inherent in her continued efforts, Irene found strength in her role. Each opposition became a stepping stone for dialogue and reflection, proving that the quest for an inclusive spirituality was not just a battle to be won, but a journey to be shared. She realized the tension itself could pave the way for a richer understanding of faith, one that encompassed the past while welcoming the future. Stepping into this challenging space was her calling, and she embraced it with all the love and empathy that had fueled her journey from the beginning. 12 months had passed since Irene embarked on her transformative journey, and as she sat on a stone bench in Assisi, she felt an overwhelming sense of nostalgia. The same bench where she had spent her childhood, dreaming of adventures and hoping to make a difference in the world, now served as her contemplative space. The sounds of the bells from the nearby church rang steadily in the background, marking not just the time of day, but also the beginning of a new cycle in her life. Each chime felt like a reminder of the changes she had embraced and the lessons she had learned. Today was special. A group of bright-eyed children had gathered around her, drawn by curiosity about the woman who had inspired so much conversation in their community. Irene looked at their eager faces, each one filled with the innocent wonder of youth, and felt her heart swell. It was her turn to share what she had experienced over the past year, and she wanted to impart not just the lessons learned, but the spirit of hope she had cultivated. "Good morning, everyone," she greeted, her voice warm and inviting. "I have something special to share with you today." The children leaned in closer, their eyes wide, awaiting the stories she was about to tell. Irene opened her hands and revealed a weathered piece of paper, the published letter from Pope Francis. She had read it numerous times, and each reading had deepened her understanding of its message. As she began to read aloud excerpts that emphasized community, love, and action, she felt the energy in the air shift. The children listened intently, their expressions reflective as they absorbed the importance of the words. Father Francis believed that our faith should inspire us to help others and create a better world, she explained. He wanted us to remember that we're all part of a larger family, and every action, no matter how small, can make a difference. The faces around her lit up with curiosity and empathy, and for a moment, it felt as if time stood still. After sharing a few passages, Irene looked at the children and asked, "How do you think we can show love and kindness to others?" Their responses were heartfelt and diverse. One girl suggested starting a community garden, while a boy chimed in with the idea of organizing events to clean up the local park. Their enthusiasm flowed from a pure desire to act, which filled Irene with renewed hope. As the discussion continued, Irene couldn't help but think of her own evolution over the year. She had not just absorbed the messages of unity and action. She had lived them. The stresses and doubts she once carried gradually faded, supplanted by a profound sense of purpose. "I may not have saved the world," she reflected softly, "but I've discovered that caring for others and acting with love creates ripples of change." Irene noticed as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light on the children's faces. Their laughter and ideas resonated with her, weaving a tapestry of connection that reflected the very essence of what she had sought throughout her journey. Each child represented a story, a vision that could contribute to a world of peace and fraternity. As the session came to an end, she felt the weight of the moment and understood that this was not just an ending, but a beautiful beginning for her and the children alike. "Let's promise to keep this spirit alive," she urged. "Together, we can carry on the message of love and unity that Father Francis started." They all nodded, forming a silent pact that would bind their hearts together in this mutual endeavor. With Lee, the echoes of the bells still resonating in the background, Irene recognized that her journey was far from over. The world would always have its complexities and challenges, but each small step taken together could pave the way toward understanding and compassion. The bond she forged with the children today was a living testament to the strength of community, the bridge over which they could cross toward a brighter future. As she prepared to leave the bench, Irene looked at the sky, letting the warmth of the moment wash over her. Weariness marked her body, reminding her of the struggles she had faced, but in her eyes shone a vibrant light. Every trial had fortified her resolve, transforming her into more than a woman of faith. She had become a symbol of hope. Through her actions, she embodied the very principles laid out in the letter, inviting everyone to join in love and action. In this space where the sacred fused with the everyday, Irene envisioned infinite possibilities. It was a canvas upon which the colors of love, fraternity, and unity were waiting to be painted. With a heart full of gratitude, she made her way back through the streets of Assisi, feeling empowered to continue this work. Each encounter had its purpose, and her journey was far from complete. It was a beautiful, transformative adventure, and she was ready to embrace what lay ahead.